5-second rule. The FBI and interrogation experts talk about something called the 5-second rule. It's simple but brutally effective. After you ask a tough question, pay close attention to the very first 5 seconds of their response. That short window is where the truth leaks out. Here's why. Lying is mentally expensive. In those first moments, the brain hasn't had enough time to edit, rehearse, or patch over gaps. So the immediate reaction, whether it's a hesitation, a nervous gesture, or even a quick glance away, carries far more weight than what comes after. Watch for what professionals call clusters. One small pause by itself doesn't mean much. Some people naturally pause a lot, but if you spot 2 or 3 things together, a hesitation, a hand to the face, and a shaky tone, all within those first few seconds, that's when suspicion shoots up. Liars often calm down after those 5 seconds, once they've had time to collect themselves. By then, they're back in control of the story. That's why you, as the listener, need to become laser-focused on that initial window. 5 seconds can tell you more than the next 5 minutes. Spotting the baseline. Before you can spot a lie, you need to know what honesty looks like for that person. Professionals call this establishing a baseline. Think about your best friend. You know when they're tired, you know how they sound when they're relaxed, you know the way they laugh when they're being genuine. Because you've seen them in countless everyday situations, spotting something off is easy. FBI interrogators create that same advantage artificially. They'll start by asking neutral, harmless questions. What's your favorite TV show? Or where did you grow up? The point isn't the answer, it's the manner of answering. Are they normally animated? Do they use lots of hand gestures? Is their voice calm or excitable? Then, once the baseline is set, they move into the sensitive material. And that's where the magic happens. If the same person who spoke freely about their favorite show suddenly clams up when asked about their whereabouts last night, that shift is suspicious. The takeaway is simple. Don't just listen to the words. Watch how the person normally communicates, then notice when that pattern suddenly changes. Lies live in the changes. The double question trap. Liars hate repetition. Consistency is their Achilles heel. That's why one of the most effective tools is asking the same question twice, but in slightly different forms. For instance, you might casually ask, "So, you went to the gym yesterday?" Later in the conversation, you come back with, "What workout did you do yesterday?" If they're telling the truth, the story flows naturally, but if they're lying, there's a good chance they'll either forget what they said earlier or try to over-explain in a way that doesn't match. Here's a classic example. Someone says, "Yeah, I was at the library yesterday evening." A few minutes later, you ask, "So, what book were you reading?" If their response suddenly turns into a vague, just some random stuff, or if they throw out a detail that doesn't fit, you've caught the inconsistency. Truth stays steady under repetition. Lies crack when tested. Undecided words. When people lie, they often build in an escape hatch. It shows up in their language. Soft, hesitant, non-committal words. Phrases like, "I think," "maybe," "I guess," or "kind of." This isn't about grammar, it's about psychology. A liar doesn't want to commit too firmly in case you challenge them, so they pad their story with wiggle room. For example, "I think I got home around 10. Compare that to someone telling the truth. "I got home at 10:05, I checked the clock." Now, to be fair, vague language doesn't always mean deception. Some people just talk that way, or they might be stressed and forget details. But the key is when this vagueness shows up exactly at the pressure points in their story, the part they most want to hide. That's when your radar should go up. Topic switching. Nothing screams, "I'm hiding something," quite like a sudden change of subject. When you touch on a sensitive detail and the other person tries to pivot into safer territory, you've just hit a nerve. It's a common survival tactic. They'll shift from "Where were you last night?" to "Hey, how's work going?" The goal is to steer the spotlight away from themselves before you notice the cracks. The key is to stay calm and not let the conversation drift. If you see that switch happen, gently guide it back. We'll talk about that in a second, but first, what did you mean about last night? You don't need to be aggressive, just firm enough to prevent them from escaping the hot zone. Interrupt and observe. One of the most underrated techniques is interruption. Here's why it works. Lying requires mental focus. The liar is spinning a story, tracking what they've already said and trying not to trip up. It's like juggling 5 balls at once. If you suddenly interrupt with a curveball, hold on. What were you doing just before that? You break their rhythm. The brain has to pause, reorient, and then pick the story back up. For liars, that's a nightmare. They might lose their place, contradict themselves, or add details that don't match. The trick is to interrupt politely, then let them continue. Something like, "Sorry for jumping in. Go ahead, finish what you were saying." Now you watch carefully. Do they restart with the same confidence? Or do they stumble, reshuffle, and fumble for words? Honest people usually pick up without much trouble. Liars often don't. The fake detail test. Here's a technique straight out of advanced interrogation playbooks. Plant a false detail in the conversation and watch how they handle it. Say someone claims they were at a certain store on Tuesday. You respond, "That's interesting, because wasn't the store closed that day?" If they're telling the truth, they'll correct you instantly. "No, it wasn't closed. I was literally there." But if they're lying, they're more likely to nod along, afraid to contradict you. They'd rather agree with your false detail than risk unraveling their whole story. This works because liars crave smoothness. They want the conversation to glide without bumps. Correcting you feels risky, but in avoiding that risk, they expose themselves. Timeline pressure. If there's one thing liars struggle with, it's time. Real experiences flow naturally through time. You leave home, you travel, you arrive. But fabricated stories often ignore the physics of reality. That's why pressing for timeline details can be devastating. Ask things like, "What time did you leave? When exactly did you arrive? How long did that take?" Then do a quick mental check. Do the numbers add up? Is the timing realistic? If someone claims they left at 9, drove across town, stopped for food, and arrived by 9:15, you know the math doesn't work. Honest people sometimes misremember exact times, but their stories generally feel possible. Liars, on the other hand, often give timelines that collapse under scrutiny. Putting it all together. Each of these techniques is powerful on its own, but the real art of lie detection comes from combining them. A pause in the first 5 seconds might mean nothing. Vagueness could just be nerves. But when you notice clusters of red flags, a vague answer, a sudden topic switch, and shaky timeline details all stacking together, the odds of deception rise sharply. And here's the secret. Trust your gut. Humans are natural lie detectors. We evolved to sense when something feels off in another person. The methods here don't replace instinct, they sharpen it. So there you have it, every way to spot a liar explained in practical steps you can use in everyday life. The real question is, which one do you think you'd notice first in your own conversations? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and while you're here, make sure to subscribe, like, and share, because the next time someone tries to bend the truth, you'll be ready.